Hello and welcome back to another episode of We Burn Blue. This episode, we're going to talk a little bit about optimism. We're back after a really poor run of form, which wasn't really predicted by your resident vibes guy, aka me. So, before we go ahead, how's it going, Sharan?
Hi, Prashant. Hi, everybody. And happy New Year. I guess happy-ish New Year. I think overall still sitting relatively pretty compared to what I was expecting for the team. But yeah, definitely didn't end the year well last year as Chelsea.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we last recorded, we were sitting in second place, potential title contenders, as everyone was calling us. We had played 15, won 9, drawn 4, and lost 2. And then fast forward to 5 games later, we've won 10, drawn 6, and lost 4. That means in the Premier League, we've just won one of our last 5 fixtures, we've drawn 2 and lost the other 2. So we started with a 2-1 win at home versus Brentford. We had the business as usual thumping of Shamrock in the Conference League. And then we had a draw versus Everton away. We had a loss to Fulham at home. We had another loss to Ipswich away, and then we had an away draw to Palace. So, Sharon, what do you think is behind this decline in form that's led us to go from title contenders to now battling for the top four?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 trillion or $1 billion question. However much you value Chelsea in your life, but basically, I think this was a real sort of first test of Maresca's chops as a manager. Because it's all well and good rotating the team between Premier League and Conference League, and I'm sure that would have created some issues behind the scenes for him. But this was the key time because you're playing back to back Premier League games, which have more meaning, right? And there's obviously a minimum threshold of challenge you're going to face in the Premier League. And I think we figured out that now it's clear Maresca doesn't actually trust quite a few of the so-called B team players who are playing in the Conference League make the jump to the Premier League and execute at that level. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think lack of trust has been really, really evident. Like you say, he's not trusting those B team players to come into the A team and make a difference in the Premier League. I mean, we saw one heavily rotated side in the last 4 games, and we didn't see that side really do too well. That's the side that lost to Ipswich 2-0. I mean, I sort of see myself in the space of I'm asking two questions, right? The initial optimism that I had last time around, was that warranted? Or was it just was I being overly optimistic? And the second thing is this just like a regression to the norm, right? Because we also discussed last time around that we were not really going to challenge for this season. So in my mind, I think the optimism may have been warranted in the way we were wrapping up games, and I feel like I'm a little bit disappointed with the way we've lost these games. And I think yeah, it's just the manner in which we've dropped points that's really concerning, right? So if we look at Everton away is you called it out last time around. It's a tough fixture historically, and I guess to get a draw there, fine, we'll take the 1 point, right? But Fulham was a game that I was really expecting us to win. It was a home game against the Fulham side that yes, they were looking good, but I didn't expect us to lose. And we did start well, and we sort of faded in the second half. Ipswich, I think, like I said, rotation galore, and we just didn't show up at all. But then you come to Palace away again, and Palace away, when we faced them at home, I think it was a similar story, and it was the same thing as like the Fulham home game as well, where we sort of dominate in the first hour, and we're looking good. We don't capitalize on our chances, and then towards the end of the second half, we start making a few mistakes. We fade out, and we put ourselves in situations where we're just vulnerable, and we end up conceding one, if not two goals, and we draw, we lose the game, right? So is this a cause for concern? what is your take on this in terms of Maresca's approach, in terms of the tactics? I know you've got some notes that you wanted to go through. So what are your top line observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were preparing for this, there's definitely some key, uh, there's some prevalent patterns and trends that have emerged in the last four games, which you've definitely pointed out some of them. But I think just before we start maybe going through this, it's always good to temper expectations, right? We go back to your the first two questions you're asking yourself. Were you being too optimistic, or is this more of a reversion to form, or were your expectations justified? You know, and I think even when we were going absolutely nuts in October, November, whenever it was, not dropping points in a single game, um, I was just there to remind everybody that this is way above expectations. So credit must go to obviously the manager and the team. And I think what the manager was doing at that time really well was preparing well for games, um, and really setting us up from the start correctly. And I think now what we're seeing is a case of maybe we don't set up correctly against opponents. And part of that is also to do with how opponents are now changing. Because, it's been a few months. Of course, teams are going to start to adapt their styles of play to face us. I don't know if that's something you've noticed, but basically I don't see teams pressing us as aggressively because at the end of the day they understand that they're playing straight into our hands. And in all of these games, the good moments that I've seen are when we catch teams on the transition or we catch them pressing us high up the pitch. And it's not necessary, like our good moments in attack are not necessarily coming when we're breaking down the low block, which again, this is one of the key patterns I'm seeing, which where we're struggling to break teams down in a middle low block, and when their structure and organization is of a certain level. But I think going back to the positive side before we start this, is it's important to remember that Maresca was very good at taking points from games. However he managed to do it, he did it. And now when we're playing back to back important games in the Premier League and we haven't taken points, I think that's why we're feeling this a lot more. Because we're starting to wonder the questions that you asked yourself earlier.
Yeah, so you make a lot of sense there, man. Like, I have seen a lot of what you're saying. Teams are setting up in a way where it's like they've understood, okay, this is how Chelsea's going to approach a game, so let's not do certain things. Let's not press them high. And I think also they've sort of recognized the players that have to be, if you shut down like a Palmer, you shut down most of our attack. And I think he's being increasingly man marked. That's something we're seeing as well. There are still moments of brilliance that happen where he's losing a marker and he's able to create something. But yeah, I think teams are more aware, and this struggle to break down a low block is something that has been a problem of ours since Pochettino's time. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think even though he's adapted his tactics this season, Maresca, that's something that we're still not able to crack. And I think I also feel like there has been a bit of a reluctance on the manager's part as well to sort of change things, which might be affecting us as well. There are visible signs of fatigue in the squad where certain players are being used quite a bit. You look at Palmer, you look at Jackson, you look at Enzo, Caicedo. Caicedo has the most minutes for us, and I think Palmer is second behind him. And that maybe that over reliance is to a fault. And we already said he hasn't shown a lot of trust in squad players as well. So that's also not really doing much, and that's reflected in his use of subs as well, right? So in the last four games, we've used nine subs, and only one of those was like four subs in the game, which was Ipswich, where we did start with the rotated lineup. So the rest of the games, he's barely used like two subs in each game, and I think also not really going to help because when you're in a moment where you need to change things and you're chasing the game or you're trying to establish and win 3 points, you need to sort of be able to rely on the squad, and that really doesn't help us, this reluctance. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. That last part where it's more about it's more about responding to the game situation, right? And I feel like there was maybe a lack of precedence of that in the Conference League and the Prem. Someone else can look this up, but I'm pretty sure we go ahead in most of our games, right? And in previous games where we've been able to get the second, he hasn't had to tinker as much, right? But I feel like in these games recently where maybe we've been on the back foot or not performing as well straight off the bat, and he's needed to make the changes earlier, he hasn't actually been as proactive as I would like, and he hasn't been as proactive as the situation demands. So this is something we're noticing um, about Maresca. And do you think this is just part of his learning curve? I mean, for me, that would be the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think it is part of his learning curve for sure. I mean, again, we do know he is a stubborn manager, right? This is something that's known about him. This also we've known in the past, at least with the likes of Mourinho, where certain moves were being done to make a statement to management. I don't think that's Enzo's style. I think he's a straight shooter. He says exactly what he's thinking. I think it's a little bit of a learning curve plus just a lack of trust, right? Like he claims he loves João Felix as a player. We've not seen him. I mean, I think he started versus Ipswich, but other than that, we've not seen him come on versus Palace when we were like drawing and we were on the back foot. He kept Felix and Nkunku on the bench. He brought on Gui and on Noni for Sancho. So I think he's also wise in that he probably knows he needs to change things, but it's because he doesn't trust these players that, he's not going for that. So it's a little bit of both, if I'm being honest, in my opinion. And that said, like he should try to change things because it's clear like there's fatigue and there's a drop in form. Like Jackson, we were, saying he's doing so great. He seems to have gotten over what was like a really long purple patch, because he's now missing chances similar to how he was last season, right? Palmer, again, being man marked a lot, and I feel like I'm seeing Palmer. He's looking a little tired. He's sort of playing in that space where he's conserving his energy, and you see him walking about a bunch unless he's like, needed or he's trying to force issues. Caicedo is all over the pitch, and there's only s- there's only so much you can ask of a player before it begins to take a toll. Same thing with like Enzo Fernandez as well, right? He's been good, but then there are some sloppy fouling, some lapses in concentration, some misplaced passes, and I think that's all indicative of Maresca needs to actually take matters into his hands and change things, right? He needs to really work with the players and maybe be more proactive with subs, maybe try to force more rotation. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point in general, um, which is in the early part of the season, right up until December. I would say Maresca was uh, he was doing a good job of being the big man, making the big decisions, and people would just have to respect, like you say, his stubbornness. But that was all. It was all easy, right? Because he has his preferred first team for the Prem, and then you've got the other players who need to play in the Conference League. So at least everyone's playing once a week, right? And there was some overlap. If you played at a certain level in the Conference League, you found yourself could find your track to the Premier League team. But it obviously changes when he's not actually doing the same things or giving the B team enough time or the same amount of time in the Premier League games, during the week. So this is the thing that maybe has been highlighted the most recently is the fact that okay, he's maybe not making those tough decisions he needs to make, because you're right. I mean, Palmer has dropped off, and even when Palmer drops off, he still bags like an amazing. I mean, like that goal against Fulham deserves recognition because my God, the touch away from the first defender and then away from the second defender, and he's just placed it before the keeper has time to set himself. Incredible, man. And that he's doing while he's not on his best, you know. So my question is, he's got to uh, he's got to make that tough decision of if Palmer's having a so-so game below par, he needs to come off against Ipswich. Felix came off, which I was quite baffled by because he was having a great game. Especially, when we see Felix play in that kind of front six, um, with Caicedo behind as a holding pivot, right? He actually plays really well. I think he's suited to that left half space. But I was surprised to see Maresca take him off rather than maybe Palmer, who wasn't having as good a game. I thought Enzo Fernandez also had a much better game than Palmer against Ipswich. So yeah, I'm questioning whether he's able to make those big decisions in these truly more important games relative to the Conference League.
Yeah, exactly. There is a definite over reliance on certain players, and but the thing is, right? Like if you were to drop Palmer, right? Say you said, okay, Palmer's not performing, let's take him off, right? Who would you bring on in his place, right? That's one question I have. And then the other thing, or let's answer that first. If you were to take off Palmer, who would you bring on in his place?
So I think it depends. Obviously, it depends on where you're playing him. Like, where's Palmer playing at that time, and what system are you playing? And maybe if we have time in this pod, we'll come on to the fact that against Crystal Palace, he changed the system. I'm not sure if you saw that, but we can come to that in a bit. I think if Palmer is playing in sort of, the center attacking mid in a forward six behind Jackson, who, by the way, Jackson should also have been dropped, I think, for a few of these games, because going into these 4 games that we're referring to in particular, his form was not great either. The issue here is we don't have a proper number 9 behind him who isn't Mark Gu, right? But going back to Palmer, if Palmer is playing in that cam position, that central attacking mid, you bring on Felix, you bring on Nkunku if either of them are not playing. Do you see what I mean? And you can also shuffle things around, right? If Palmer is, for instance, playing in that left attacking mid, again, Felix is like a no-brainer. Don't forget, you also have guys like Kani Chukwemeka and Cassidy on the reserves, maybe not on the bench for the squad, for the match squad, but there are actual options. And if he's playing in that right attacking mid, again, we've seen Enzo have great impact in that role rather than on the left side. And similarly, I think Nkunku has played there for us occasionally and in preseason. But look, like you have, if Palmer is world class, I don't think Nkunku and Felix are that far behind that you can't bring them on in the 60th minute, as opposed to waiting till the 75th and leaving Palmer on when he's having a poor game. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The only issue is essentially that out of those 4 players you mentioned, that's Felix, Carney, Nkunku, and Cassidy. It's very likely 3 of those leave, maybe even in January, right? In this transfer window. So that becomes one of the problems, which we'll get into, right? The transfer window. But
The, Prashant, that's only a problem if it happens, right? But if we're assessing the games gone by, he's had those options.
yeah, but I think the fact that they might go is just an indication that he doesn't rate them that highly to have them as options, right? had he said, okay, Carney come in if Palmer's not doing well, or any of those players could come in, right? He would actually use them, right? Versus Palace, like I said, Gui came on for Jackson, Noni came on for Sancho, Felix and Nkunku were both on the bench. Palmer did at points look visibly tired in that game, but he didn't opt to bring either of them on. And Felix is sort of the player who you, between Nkunku and Felix, the way it's sort of gone, if you had to say there's a player to replace Palmer should he be injured, Felix is probably that player. But we didn't see him come on, right? So I think overall, Palmer is there has been a problem with sort of the goal scoring, which has really reared its head in the last 4 games, right? So we've got four in the last four. Jackson, like you said, has been out of form for some time. Gui has still got ways to go. I don't think it's fair to say he's not good enough. I think he's still really young. Nkunku is someone who was at points playing in the number nine, but I don't think he trusts him enough. So, in terms of the overall goal scoring as well, I think that that's an area where you look at the rest of the squad. You look at you look at Sancho, you look at Noni, you look at Pedro Neto. These are guys who have at various points chipped in with goals, but overall, there's just been everyone seems to have dropped off at the same point. And we have FA Cup. We have the FA Cup coming up now. We have obviously we're recording before Morecambe, and that is somewhere where we hope we can have a sustained run. We have Conference League, which will be back in March, I guess, and then we have obviously the Premier League. Should we be worried about this whole the drop in the number of goals scored? Because to me, I think we're still creating chances, we're just not being clinical enough. Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, you've kind of answered your question there. But definitely, like you've highlighted, there's an over reliance on Palmer and Jackson to score our goals. For sure, you'll hear some people say like, okay, this is the point in the season where you need other contributors. But I think you also have to look at the way we're creating. First of all, we're definitely creating enough to win games, for sure. So that's, in a way, that's not something to worry about. It's more about the finishing, like you say. And then the next question is, okay, well, what types of chances are you trying to create? And I have 2 points on this. One is, if you look at the Man City kind of successful sort of last 10 years, they've always had that element of a distance shooter. And even if you look at, obviously the Chelsea days gone by, right? Lamps would occasionally pop up with, or Drogba even with like a 30-yard screamer or a 25-yard screamer from outside the box. I don't think we've got the personnel to do that, especially if you're playing Palmer kind of well, not playing, like let's say it's a situational thing where he ends up in the box, it then means you're one guy who's really reliable from shooting outside the box. If he finds himself inside the box and high up the pitch, who is going to be behind them? Who's going to be receiving maybe a lucky bounce on the edge of the box or a cutback at the edge of the box to finish from outside the box? So I think we're really lacking a distance shooter. And I think, I've seen us, particularly with Neto and Madueke from the right, but also Sancho also does this from the left. When they cut in sort of early from deeper positions and swing in across, I'm just looking at who's in the box. And, when Neto and Madueke are crossing the ball, Cucurella scoring a header, by the way, I can't remember who it happened against, but it happened this season. And I'm like, I think that'll be the only time he scores a header in that fashion, and Jackson isn't particularly strong in the air. I'm not saying he's bad, but who are your targets in the box when you're swinging these crosses in? So this is what I'm saying. I'll come back to the principle of the point, which is, you're trying to create scoring opportunities, and sure, we are creating them, but are you creating them in the right way for the players that you have at your disposal? I think if we, start positioning Palmer, tell him, okay, fine, you let Enzo Fernandez play right attacking mid, let him make the channel runs in behind and get into the box. let Palmer drift around, and then maybe to finish off a move, he needs to stay in zone 14, which is, kind of the middle section of the pitch just outside the opposition's box. You kind of position your players where you envision scoring your goals from, rather than asking Cucurella to end up, playing number 9 alongside Jackson in the box trying to win headers. I think that's a glaring issue with the system, and that is kind of contributing to this lack of goals that we've seen.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of injuries, right? Do you think that we're suffering because we're missing Fofana and then his ready replacement in Badiashile? Or do you think that, I mean, we've anyway, it's not like our defensive record was stellar with Fofana and Koval playing. So do you think that's also impacting our games recently?
Yeah, I mean, of course, look, if there was chemistry being built, which I think there was in the early part of the season, where the side was pretty much consistent, barring a few suspensions, right? And similarly, you have chemistry being built in the B team in the Conference League, right? Once you start to mix and match those out of necessity or out of choice, um, of course, it's going to create um, there's going to be some variances in performance and a loss in consistency, right? And I think I also wanted to make this point, which is Maresca's learning as a manager. We need to give him time because he's demonstrated he not only has the tactical nous, but he also has the man management skills to get us to where we want to be. But also we need to understand that once those changes are made and players are no longer playing with other players they're used to playing with. I said players a lot. There's a learning curve for them, right? Aside from their own technical abilities individually, there's also the team chemistry. And I think we've seen that, the half-hearted changes, right, between games have also kind of led to that. It begs the question, like, should Maresca just, regardless of whether it's Premier League or Cup or Conference League, should he just do his A and B? Because I wonder whether this lack of this kind of chopping and changing of like maybe 3 or 4 players per game is actually benefiting us.
So you're saying he should just, if he's choosing to play, what was it, Team A, Team B? If he's choosing to play not a Team A player, he should just play the whole Team B rather than bring them in because the Team B as such has their chemistry already built.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm suggesting. And of course, like you mentioned, it's ideal because of course each team needs to have its own fit players and non-suspended players, right? But fitness and suspensions aside, I think yes, I would try to keep those teams, those units playing together because I think the chemistry also makes the unit stronger where there might be more weaknesses in team B, for instance.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm not gonna lie, I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, I see the merit in that approach. I just feel like then if he played Team B and given that their quality is, I wouldn't say it's they're worse. I mean, they're not as good as Team A, let's just put it that way. If they were to lose games, we'd be all over him saying, what is he doing? And I think in this period, one thing that I've really felt very strongly about our fan base is that there's a lot of overreaction. There's like this massive overreaction to the run of form where people have been saying, oh, we shouldn't have sold Conor Gallagher, we'd have him as an option in midfield, or why did we loan out Chaloba and keep Disasi? We should have done it the other way around. And I mean, for a lot of these people, I'm just like, when Gallagher was being sold, you were the happiest, right? Or when Chaloba was going and we had pretty much said, okay, I mean, I know you and I agreed that he was one of our best defenders closing out last season, and we shouldn't see him go. So when I saw this happening, when I saw these same people saying, "Oh, why did we, loan him out, and why didn't we keep him, or why didn't we sell?" I'm just like, why is there such an overreaction, you know? And there's been a lot of conversations about, are we just trying to build a squad? Is there just too much squad planning happening where we're just buying too many young players? You know, we're just buying for the future. We're not concerned with our current record, and we should be going for proven players, players with experience. And then there's other people saying this is like a long-term project, and squad planning should be key. For all of these people, I just feel like it's all just one big overreaction. Like none of this was the conversation when, like, we go back to like the last time we recorded, nobody was having this conversation. It was just focused on, are we potential title contenders? And now, like, you come 5 games later, we've had 2 losses, 2 draws, and suddenly it's like the world is ending. It's just, it seems like it's too much, man. I mean, I don't know. Have you been seeing this on your socials and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think football fans in general are just very sensitive. Um, I don't know if that's just part of the times we live in, but yeah, I think those people have to decide where their expectations lie, because Maresca coming in at the start of the season was a clear sign of this is a building project, right? It doesn't, you know, you can't have the finished article within a few months. That's just not possible. We saw the same thing with Guardiola when he came in. Arteta has proven it, and you know, you look at Slot. Slot is coming in a period where Chelsea, Arsenal, City, a lot of teams are kind of you know reworking themselves, right? And we're all going through patches, and Slot's just taking advantage of that. But that's, I think, because Liverpool, in terms of their personnel, are the finished article. They have a great squad, right? So when it comes to your point on squad planning, there is an element of truth to that. But you're right. Overall, we weren't talking about this a month ago when we were sitting pretty in second, not too far away from first. So yeah, I think it's about understanding that we were always going to suffer these kind of results. It was just a question of how they were going to manifest themselves. You know, it's, I think, the fact that we built ourselves so high early in the season, the drop off is felt even harder. But when it comes to the squad planning, when I said there's an element of truth, um, I think it. You look at the left back position, and I think our approach there kind of caught us cold. You know, because I'm not sure why he doesn't trust Vega to come in and invert into central midfield, but you know, he's basically saying like, okay, he maybe can't play in these Premier League games, but by alienating Chilwell, right, you're then left with Cucurella, right, because you sold Matson in the summer, and that approach, you know, to man management and to sort of game management and your transfers has left us with only Cucurella playing at left back. And then you know, like when Gusto was on the team sheet against Everton, I was thinking, okay, he's going to play at right back and Colwell's going to play at left back. But it turns out Gusto is playing at left back, and the squad planning, and like you may point out a lack of trust. It's leading to what I think is now over tinkering, right? Because fine, you know, you don't have to have Colwell playing central centre back, as we've seen. Tosin can take up that role, maybe to not the same effect, but he can do it, right? But why can't Gusto just stay at right back? Colwell can just invert from left back and play in the back three as per usual on the left side. I think we also need to point that out with Maresca, that sometimes, you know, he's doing a bit too much with certain players, and I find like when Gusto is playing left back or James is playing left centre back, it's a bit okay. Maybe it's to catch the opposition cold, but more often than not, it can catch us cold.
Yeah, he's sort of overthinking things in a sense. But like all that said, right? How are you feeling now about the second half of the season? Are you optimistic in terms of, you still think we're gonna get that top 4 finish? Are you looking at things a little more glass half empty, where it's going to be a bit of a struggle for us. I can tell you for me, I'm still optimistic. I just think I have tempered expectations, something we called out last time, where I remember you said no need to temper expectations, but I feel like it's time for me to sort of do that. I still remain optimistic, but I think I'm going to be a little more conscious about the fact that yes, this is a young squad. There is some lack of experience, there is some immaturity, there are some mistakes there, and it's not always going to be, straightforward for us to sort of win a game. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you want from the rest of the season, right? Because we've identified that Maresca and the players are going through a learning curve. And, specifically in these games where we aren't performing to a certain standard or we fall behind early for whatever reason, right? I mean, shout out to Ipswich for pressing the absolute shit out of us and getting a goal early, right? But, in those scenarios, the players are also, having to learn about maybe how to manage games better and how they should respond in those situations. So again, I tend to err on the side of caution. Um, I think if we address some of the issues I'm about to raise, we should be on track for Champions League. If not, Europa League for me is still achievable because I wouldn't say we're that far off. But some of these issues that really need addressing are things like when we defend on the transition, we're pretty bad. And I think it's got to do with a lack of balance in the system. Granted, we all like to watch attacking football, and I think that's why Chelsea have been such a good watch this season, is because it's most of these games are end to end, box to box. So I just think in terms of the systems we're using, whether it's 3-2-5, 3-1-6, he used a 4 in build up against Palace, at least that's what I saw, where the fullbacks going wide. But again, we looked even more exposed centrally as a result. So yeah, I think a lot of goals being conceded on the transition, particularly when we hold this offside trap using the edge of our own box. It's become very predictable. If he wants to hold an offside trap, it needs to be at a line that we know about that the opposition doesn't. These are key defensive issues, particularly on the transition, that he needs to fix. And you know, I actually think that the way we defend is somewhat detracting from the way we attack or score goals, because in the early part of the season we saw that we were scoring a lot of goals from counterattacks, and more direct play. And if we're trying to constantly win the ball high up the pitch, we're sacrificing that potential outcome. I think also to manage games better, right? We can actually give the opponent 10, 15 minutes of possession where we try and win it back in our half and hit them on the break with our speedsters. And I think Jackson will particularly benefit from that, where he gets a little bit more time to get his first touch out and, carry the ball. And no one's really talking about the intensity of our game. And you had mentioned earlier that we are fading in games, or at least that's what you've noticed. And is it to do with fatigue? Arteta seems to think that it's because it's a very busy December period, right? So important games in December are not great because maybe the players are starting to switch off for Christmas, New Year's, all that stuff. I think it has more to do with the intensity of our style of play. We're constantly man marking, right? Which means players are dragging us all over the pitch. And we're pressing high up. We're trying to win the ball back. It's super high intense. And I don't think we can do that for 90 minutes every game this season. I don't think that's achievable. And I don't think it's smart to ask the players to do that. There are points in games where we can sit back and actually counterattack. And like maybe that covers the defensive aspects of the game. In midfield, I do think we are short. If Caicedo and Enzo are expected to play like this the whole season, their legs are going to go maybe around February, March. So they need some adequate support. It seems he's not going to play Carney Cassidy or Kieran Dewsbury Hall in those defensive midfield positions, like those holding midfield positions. So then we have to look at the January transfer window as an opportunity to strengthen that area. Lavia's fitness, I think he's close to coming back as we record. But again, whether you can depend on him for the rest of the season as a cover option remains to be seen, and I highly doubt it. And lastly, going forward, I do think we have been trying to create the wrong sorts of opportunities for our forwards. I think we need to prioritize wingers or fullbacks or whoever is running into the channels, getting to the byline and drilling, low crosses across the box or hitting cutbacks to the edge of the box rather than swinging in crosses from deep to the far post. Because I don't think a Jadon Sancho or like a Pedro Neto, none of these guys are like aerial threats. It's mainly Jackson who is the aerial threat, and he's not even that great. So I'm seeing that as quite a mismatch in terms of the players we have versus how we're actually creating chances. And I think if we kind of sort out these certain issues I've mentioned, we will be looking better, come April, May.
Okay, cool. So the short answer is you're not as optimistic.
No, definitely not. But you know me well enough.
Okay, cool. But yeah, you make some good points there, especially on like things that you're seeing, right? There are some very obvious things in there and some not so obvious things that I haven't spotted. But in terms of now, especially in the midfield, you called out some players and the need for reinforcements. It's a good time to jump into what's happening in the January transfer window because, of course, this is city season. It's descended upon us, rumors flying around, but there are some concrete things that have happened and that are likely to happen that will sort of affect how the rest of the season goes, right? So if you talk about, let's look at the squad as it is and what's changed since the 1st of Jan. You've had Anselmino recalled from loan. So that's the young defender we signed from Boca Juniors, right? Loaned him back and he's back now, getting experience with the first team squad. Slonina as well, called back from loan, but I think he's likely just going to go back out. And then, of course, Achimpong and George were promoted. That was obviously not related to the transfer window, but that's changed the makeup of the squad a little bit. We saw Achimpong start versus Palace, and he was pretty good, to be fair. In terms of movement out, so again, like I mentioned earlier when you talked about these guys, Cassidy and Carney likely to leave. From what I hear, I think Cassidy has already rejected Torino, and he does have some other clubs in Italy, France, and Netherlands interested. So I think he'll definitely go. Carney, we have a 40 million release clause for him, and I think we're looking at a sale only, so that might make it difficult, but he might go as well. And then Drewsbury Hall, your other midfielder. Apparently, he's also up for sale. I mean, if you go back to when Maresca was signed and we talked about it, we said, okay, Drewsbury Hall is a player that's played with Maresca at Leicester. He should slot in quite easily, but I think it's been quite the contrary. He's not really impressed. And I think it's more of an admission that, okay, they brought him in to make Maresca's transition easily, and they're seeing that he's not going to really fit in. So is apparently up for sale, and if not a sale, he might definitely go out on loan by the end of Jan. So in the midfield, then what's likely to happen, I believe, is Ugo Chukwu might come back from his loan at Southampton, and I don't see us, at least so far, I haven't seen us being linked with other midfielders, unless there's something I've missed. Have you?
Um, I mean, there's the obvious one of Santos coming back,
Yeah.
and I've heard different viewpoints on this. I actually think we could really use Santos in our team. Obviously I've only seen some of his highlights, which means only his good performances, right, for Strasbourg. But I think that would be the obvious connection there. When it comes to Dewsbury Hall, I would like to point out I don't think he's been used correctly. I think he's been shoehorned in because he's been purchased by you know, Maresca and um, the the board jointly, and he's not being used as like a deep lying playmaker, as one of the holding midfielders, or as like an eight that then goes into the left 10 half space. So I just, again, is that because they don't see a future for him, or is it just because the intense competition for the first team means that you can't play a Kieran Dewsbury Hall over an Enzo Fernandez?
No, I think my reading of it is they don't see a future for him. He's not really settled in well. I do recall that when he first came about 6 to 8 weeks into the season, there was some talk of how he's not fully bedded in and he's finding it difficult at Chelsea. And I think him being up for sale now is probably just an indication of the fact that, okay, Maresca also doesn't see him being vital to his squad the way he was at Leicester, and it's not going to work out. So yeah, I think that's it for him. And for with regards to Santos, everything I'm reading is that he's going to stay at Strasbourg. That was always the plan for him to have a full season of development there. And the fact that he is doing well is tracking what they're expecting. So he gets a full season under his belt where he's a regular starter, and then he comes back in the summer ready to push for a starting place. And I think that does sort of make sense because if he were to come back, right, we would still he'd be fighting with Enzo and Caicedo, and as we've already called, Maresca is really reliant on those two, and it makes it more difficult for him to get those regular minutes he'd be getting at Strasbourg.
But we're saying that it's okay to do that for Ugochukwu, which I'm not against, because at the end of the day, Ugochukwu adds something different. He adds more height and more steel in the midfield. Um, although, okay, lots of questions popped into my head when you were going through the potential list of midfielders leaving. What about Vega? Because I see him as a potential kind of defensive midfielder as well when Caicedo needs a rest. I don't think he's as bad as his lack of like first team opportunities in the Prem suggest.
Yeah, I don't think he's as bad as that either. I think we apparently turned down Wolves who were interested, but I don't see us selling him. I think at some point we will need that cover at left back, which is where he plays as well, because I think Chilwell is likely to go. Of course, he's on huge wages and he's not exactly cheap, which doesn't make him a very attractive prospect. So I think he'll probably go out on loan. And I mean, I think it's fair to the guy. He's captained us at points, and while if I was to just be like, okay, pure heart, I wouldn't want him to go, but I understand that he's not really going to fit in the system, so he's likely to go out on loan. So I think with that, Vega should not be allowed to go anywhere. He should be kept. And then in terms of the defense as well, there's apparently Disasi who might be allowed to leave because it's clear. I mean, he doesn't fit Maresca's style in how Maresca wants a centre back to play, which is why we've been seeing him at right back. What are your thoughts on Disasi?
Yeah, I mean, look, if Disasi goes, you need to bring back Trev. That's the thing, right? I think we've found that, okay, um, that right back inverting to right center back role is an issue, and he doesn't seem to want to use Gusto there, where I think he could be well used. So yeah, I think this is the area that also needs a one in one out situation. It can't be one out because Fofana's fitness is not reliable. Definitely not playing Badia Shield there ever again. And Tosin, for me, he's more of a central centre back. I don't think he's got the legs to actually play at that right centre back area. So yeah, Chaloba for me comes back in at that point. But one other thing I wanted to ask was, you know, we're saying Carney, Cassidy, KDH are all going, potential sales of others as well. But there has to be a market for all of these players. I mean, and you pointed it out absolutely correctly. We've put them on such high wages. we're blocking ourselves from making the sale. Who would you see a Chilwell go to?
So Chilwell's the only one there on the high wages. The rest of them are more in line with the new wage structure that the club has put in place. In terms of markets for them, I believe there is interest in Carney. There is also interest in Dewsbury Hall. West Ham are apparently interested in a loan, and there is another European club that's also interested in picking him up. So I think there is a market for some of these guys. They might not fit well in the Chelsea system, and their stock might have fallen in C's eyes, but that doesn't mean that it's fallen in the eyes of the rest of the footballing world, right? And I think, yeah, Chilwell's the only potential problem there in terms of his wages. And I'm pretty sure that if it was a loan deal, there'd probably be some sort of agreement to for Chelsea to cover part of his wages or something like that, right? In terms of Chalobah that you mentioned, right? So one question, would you recall Chalobah or would you buy Guehi? Second question, if you were Chalobah, would you come back? Really, after the way you were treated?
I don't think he has much of a choice. Unfortunately, the way these contracts work, Chalobah just has to come back and see his time out if he is of that temperament. But I have a feeling that if Maresca and the board can take the approach of let bygones be bygones, and they can promise Chalobah some game time. I actually think he'll be up for it because I think his goal would be to come back and um, you know challenge for that first team spot, which I do think he's worthy of in the Chelsea right back slash right centre back role. I wouldn't spend the money on Gehi because I think we have other areas where we need to spend money on. Um, Frankly speaking, I wouldn't spend any money at all. But maybe that's just me playing Football Manager in my head. It's maybe not realistic. Um, but for instance, one area where I did mention earlier in the pod we need to strengthen in is goals from other sources, particularly from outside the box, from long range. And we mentioned a recall for Ugochukwu. This is another area where I would expect Santos. Not to keep harping on about it, but that's the reason why I brought Santos up. Was you recall him? He adds that extra goal threat from outside the box. If we're not bringing him back, um, where else are we adding, right? So that we don't fall into this trap of not having enough goal scorers and a variety of goal scorers.
Yeah, so that brings up what we're expecting to happen with the outgoings in terms of the attack as well, right? So we're talking about a lack of goals, and apparently we're willing to let Nkunku go. And granted, he has got most of his goals in the Conference League, but he is, I believe, our current top scorer. We are likely to let him go as well. It's just a matter of whether it's now or in the summer. João Felix as well, there was some talk of him, but I think he's likely to stay as cover for Palmer, like I called out earlier. The only big name in terms of an incoming that's attack related that I've heard of is Kvicha. How do you pronounce his name, man? Kvaratskhelia from Napoli. I think they're open to letting him go in Jan, but there's a lot of competition for him. Apparently, PSG are close to agreeing personal terms already, so I don't see much happening there. I think any other major moves, like a striker or a left back, cover or any other major moves will likely happen come summer. At least that's what I'm seeing. Unless there's something out of the blue like Pedro Neto signing last in the summer, I don't see much happening. And personally, when I was looking to the Jan window a month ago, I wasn't expecting too much business. Of course, I think a lot of it is reactionary right now. And the biggest move that we'd make, which is probably defensive in either Gehi or Chalobah, is injury enforced. I think if Fofana and Badiashile had both not been injured at the same time, we wouldn't be looking to do that. We'd probably just let the players who were expected to leave leave.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up Badia Shield. I don't think he's good enough for this team. I don't actually know why he's so highly rated. Um, anyway, what I'm saying is I would definitely put him on the list too because the players can only leave if there's a market for them, right? And if there's no market for Disasi, I would sell Badia Shield because you know I think they're at the same level, to be honest. Whereas Disasi is probably not a great passer of the ball. He's a better maybe ball carrier than Badiashile. But yeah, neither of them get anywhere near the first team. I think after these performances that we've seen this season, um, I think also the Conference League has had this thing of making them look better than they actually were. But I guess also that's why players like Dewsbury Hall, once they get minutes in the first team, maybe it's borne out a little bit more the fact that they actually can't fit the system or they're not up to the standard. But yeah, it's a question of these injuries, right?
Yeah.
Do we have any indication of when Fofana will be back?
So again, I'm sure you've read, right? There's like conflicting views on that. Maresca came out saying he's out till the end of the season, but apparently Fafana and his camp are pretty optimistic, saying should be back by like March or April. So unclear on that. Badiashile, you might have had a point with him being on the market, but he's anyway injured. He's out for at least a month, I believe. He's also got a hamstring problem, so we won't be seeing him for the next month. But then otherwise, in terms of injuries, Reece James, Romeo Lavia, both back in training, could feature in the FA Cup as well. So on that front, it's looking a little better. I'm just obviously concerned with the overall, health of the squad and just being in a place where we're able to challenge and we fix these issues that we have. Because, like I said, I'm optimistic, but tempered expectations, and I don't see us like we're going to jump into predictions as well, and it's not as runaway as it has been in the past in terms of the results. I think it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag, but I don't think there'll be too much business in January, honestly, when we're looking at it a month from now.
Yeah, fair enough. And I listened to an athletic podcast a while ago that said that actually January signings overall, on average, don't really pay off too much in the end. It's usually the summer signings that work out better. But I guess let's see what Maresca decides or has decided about the squad thus far. I think one area which I should have mentioned even when I was talking about my predictions for the rest of the season, or my outlook for it. If he doesn't fix that goalkeeper situation, my God, man! Like when I watch each game, I kind of make tactical / performance based notes, and the first one is usually Sanchez needs to leave because I swear he just goes long so much it's ridiculous. Jorgensen actually understands the remit of the role, which is to try and invite pressure as much as possible and then play through it. Sanchez's response to playing through the pressure is to just go over the top. And between that and him, trying to launch a counter attack when we're 1-0 up, but under a bit of pressure, only to just give the ball away. I feel like I've seen those two things happen the most from any pattern of play in the Chelsea games this season.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that. I think I just didn't bother discussing the goalkeeper because I think that's something that's going to be fixed in summer. I think it's pretty obvious, and it's just a matter of time. We've been seeing it, so let's just not bother with that. But
Yeah, but you see, for me on that point, right? If you're asking me where we land up, I think if Sanchez is in goal for the rest of the season, I don't think we make fourth.
but so you could argue that, and that's what I was saying when it came to like the injury point, right? Like without Fofana versus with Fofana, it's not like we had 10 out of 13 of whatever 15 clean sheets with Fofana and he's dropped off and or he's gone injured and we're now down to like one clean sheet in the last 7 or 8 without him, right? We've been conceding goals in the fashion that we've been conceding them in the last 5 or 4 games before that as well. So I don't think that it's down to just Sanchez or whether he's continuing to play. I don't think it's down to that, whether we'll be in the top four or not. I think it's more a question of the attack, right? Because while we were conceding goals, we were also scoring them. Like if you look at Wolves, we had what, a 6-2, we beat them 6-2. when we played them at the Molineux. So now Wolves are coming up again, and if our attack is not performing, and the way it did then those two goals that we conceded when we played them away, if we concede the same two goals and we don't score as many as we did, then that's where the problem is. It's not down to those two goals that we concede, because we conceded those two goals even when we played them. You get my point?
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just fundamentally disagree because you can win a title by not conceding goals and scoring one. You don't have to
No,
score
for
six every
sure.
game, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So my thing is very simple, and I think you're disagreeing here, which is fair enough. But I think if you replace Sanchez with Jorgensen, you will concede less goals. That's all I'm saying. Like you said, before and after Fofana's injury, we were conceding goals. Absolutely no doubt. And I agree with you to the point where I'm saying, yeah, it's more to do with Sanchez that we're conceding goals rather than the actual defenders in front of him.
Fair enough. I don't disagree with you that, we'd probably concede less with Jorgensen in there. I'm just saying that the point of goalkeeping being addressed in terms of, are we going out there and buying like a proven number one who's going to instantly come in and shore up the defense and get us those 10 points? I think that happens in the summer. It doesn't happen now.
Yeah, fair. Because yeah, he probably doesn't want to affect the squad dynamic any more than your current list of sales that would already disrupt the kind of vibe in the dressing room and the background already. But like you mentioned, let's get on to some predictions then, considering considering everything we've discussed today, and kind of where we are with our levels of optimism and our expectations. How do you see sort of the next few games panning out? Of course, we have FA Cup against Morecambe, but I think we're both predicting a win there. So the next Premier League game is midweek against Bournemouth.
Correct. Midweek against Bournemouth at home. I think that's going to be a tough game, and I think we should draw that. Bournemouth have had, sort of mixed form, and even though I think when we played them away, we got a 1-0 draw, which was a scrappy win. So I think given where we are, a draw should be a well-earned point. What about you?
I think we will struggle against Bournemouth. Um, the same principles apply in the reverse fixture. I think they're well set up to counter us. So I'm looking at a draw as well if we're lucky.
Okay. So our next game then is Wolves at home, on the 20th of Jan. I think we should win that. Of course, we just talked about how we conceded two versus them at the Molineux, but we scored six. I mean, I'm hoping we can score just that one more goal than they do and get the win. So that should be a win for me. How do you see that playing out?
It's sounding like you're not much of a defensive fan. I think yeah, the mentality of scoring one more than the other team. I think that's what's making Chelsea exciting this season. I remember Liverpool were like that when Klopp first came in quite a while ago now, and it made them exciting to watch as well. And I agree. I think we are where we are with the defense. And we do need the 3 points against Wolves. I just think this time around we're not going to get as lucky. I think Madueke's hat trick had a little bit of fortune in it. Nevertheless, he scored it, and kudos to him. But I think we're looking at a draw this game.
Okay, all right. So draw for you, and then we have a trip to the Etihad next, which versus City. And I mean, given the way City season has been, they have a lot more on the line with that game, and it's going to be a huge test for us. But if I'm being honest, we're probably going to lose it.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I don't know why. I'm just getting this gut feeling of optimism. Uh, Rodri isn't going to be back, I'm assuming, that early. So I know there was talk of him potentially coming back in like April, right? Towards the end of that. But um, yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to take some points against City. I didn't think we played terribly in the first game of the season against them. I actually think the way they set up, it does leave some opportunities to counter. And I think the narrative of the game, we understand that City are better than us on paper, to the point where Maresca can get away with being the underdog and actually sitting off them a bit. In which case, you know, it opens up the potential for the counterattack. I can see us taking at least a draw from this.
Okay, nice. For a change, you have a more positive result than I do.
Yeah. So when we inevitably lose, you can rub it in.
Nah, let's see how it goes. And then first Feb is a big one. It's the Graham Potter derby, Chelsea versus West Ham. I don't know if you caught that or not, but West Ham sacked Lopetegui and Graham Potter is the new manager, and he gets to visit us for his fourth or fifth game at West Ham. I was initially quite optimistic, but given that fact, I'm gonna lean towards maybe a draw because it's West Ham and they can surprise, and we don't know what Potter's gonna bring to the table.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I think it's a very good move for them because rather than reverting to type, they've again gone with somebody who I think is a bit more progressive than a David Moyes. No disrespect to David Moyes, though he's achieved a lot. But yeah, I think I can see us struggling in this game. Again, London derby. I don't think we've performed too well in those this season, except for against Spurs. So I think we'll drop points here. I'll go with a loss.
Okay, and then if we beat Morecambe, which I think is likely, we'll have an FA Cup fixture on the weekend of 8th Feb. Okay, note from the editing table. We just found out we're facing Brighton in the FA Cup a week before we face them in the league. My prediction still stands. I think we're going to beat them for reasons that I discussed. Plus, I think we need a deep run in the FA Cup. Sharan, however, thinks we're going to lose due to rotation. Okay, back to the pod. And then after that, our next Premier League fixture will be Brighton away on the 15th of Feb. I think, given their current form, it's not been too good for them, and João Pedro has just been injured. I'm not sure if he'll be back by then, but that really hampers their attack. I think we should get a win there.
Yeah, I don't know. I do need to predict a win for us at some point. But I can't see it. Yeah, you know what? Actually, I think you're right. I think we will win this game just about. Maybe 2-1. Obviously, it depends which Chelsea team he puts out, but I'm hoping in the Prem he maintains his strongest lineup.
Yeah. And then Aston Villa on the 22nd of Feb. So they've had mixed form recently, and I was expecting a tougher game when we played them at home, but we did beat them 3-0, so that's giving me a little bit of confidence. I'm gonna call win, but if we draw, I wouldn't be surprised. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I think it's look at this phase. I mean, at every phase in the season, it's all about taking points. But I say this phase in particular because we did lose a couple games in the last four. So I still think this particular set of fixtures we're discussing is relatively difficult because of the City and Villa games, and taking points is the of the utmost. So I think we'll manage a draw. Um, and hopefully we're through in the FA Cup as well, just to keep the optimism up. So one of the things I just noticed now, looking at the fixture list, is that we actually play Brighton on the Friday night, which will be quite interesting. I'm not sure what our record is for Friday games, but I don't remember us being a very kind of adaptable team when it comes to these scenarios. So I might backtrack and say we are actually going to draw that game. But yeah, I'm hoping we take points in all of the games we play. Yeah, it just depends on which lineup comes out. And we did want to discuss the last game of February, which is against Southampton. I mean, this is a sure must win, right?
Yeah, I think that should be an easy win for us. If we don't beat Southampton, then I don't know, man. Worst case scenario, I don't know, but we should beat Southampton.
I think the point here is if we don't beat Southampton and this sort of patchy form continues, you can expect to hear grumblings about Maresca's future. I do think if Chelsea don't qualify for the Europa League, and this is a hot take here, me recording at like 7 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday, but nevertheless, I think if Maresca doesn't at least get us to qualify for the Europa League, I think he's gone in the summer.
Ooh, that's a spicy one. I don't see that happening, to be very honest. Even if we don't qualify for the Europa League, I think it's pretty clear that we're trying to build something with Maresca, and I don't see a scenario in which he leaves. It tracks with what we know about the club and historically how the club has operated, and even Clear Lake have operated in the little time they've been here. But I don't think that happens. But I mean, that's a really nice note to end this episode on, right? Like a really spicy take.
Yep, that's why I'm here, man.
All right. And that's a wrap on another episode of We Burn Blue. Let us know if you agree with Sharon's hot take or not over on Twitter at We Burn Blue Pod. And give us a follow on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts and leave us a review as well. We'd love to hear what you think. Catch you in the next one.